My dad broke my car, refused to help me, and then threw me out of the house with my mom. But worst of all, I found out that my mom had despised me since the moment I was born. My name is Ethan, I'm 21, and after my last relationship fell apart so violently that it left me questioning almost everything I thought I knew about love and trust, I had no choice but to move back in with my parents, Carl and Deborah. It wasn't a glamorous return, more like an exhausted, broken shuffle through the front door with nothing but a duffel bag, a drained phone, and a heart that hadn't stopped aching in weeks. My parents welcomed me not coldly but not warmly either, just enough politeness to not call it resentment, as if my return was an inconvenience they tolerated because that's what parents are supposed to do. I told myself it would be temporary, that I just needed time to gather my thoughts, save some money, and figure out who I was now that everything I had built had collapsed so thoroughly. But even in that first week, I could feel it in the air of that house, that familiar heaviness, the quiet judgment, the subtle reminders that I was under their roof again and therefore under their control. One quiet afternoon while my mom was at work and I was upstairs trying to finish a job application, my dad knocked on my door and asked if he could borrow my car, just for a quick errand. I hesitated. He hadn't driven it in years and had a reputation for being reckless. But I didn't want to stir up another argument, so I handed him the keys without much fuss. Not even an hour later, my phone rang with his name flashing across the screen, and the second I heard his voice, I knew something was wrong. He told me, almost casually, that he had crashed my car at an intersection, rear-ended someone because he had missed a stop sign. No apology, no panic in his voice, just a flat explanation like he was telling me the weather had changed. My stomach dropped. That car wasn't just transportation. It was the last thing I still had that was mine, the one tool I relied on to get to work, to interviews, to anywhere that might eventually lead me out of this house. And just like that, it was gone. The damage to my car was worse than I expected. Crumpled front end, shattered light, a bent axle that meant it wasn't just scratched up, it was completely undrivable. It got towed to a repair shop across town, and they told me it would be at least 2 weeks, maybe more, before I'd have it back. In the meantime, I was stuck. My job was 45 minutes away, a commute that used to feel manageable with my own wheels but now seemed impossible without them. There was no public transit that reached that far, no coworker nearby to carpool with, and my dad, who had caused the accident, offered nothing. Not a ride, not gas money, not even a sincere apology. He just said, "These things happen," and went back to watching TV while I stood in the kitchen, phone in hand, trying to figure out how the hell I was going to keep my job when I couldn't even get there. In a moment of desperation, I came up with what I thought was a reasonable solution. I offered to drive my mom to her job in the morning using her car and then head to mine right after, making sure I'd return in time to pick her up later. It wasn't perfect and it would mean long days and tight timing, but at least I wouldn't have to risk losing my job. When I suggested it, standing there in the kitchen while she poured her coffee, she didn't even look up. She shook her head and said, with that clipped tone that always meant her mind was already made up, "I'm not rearranging my routine to fit yours. I don't want to be dependent on your schedule." I stood there, stunned, trying to swallow the frustration rising in my throat. She walked away, leaving me in the silence of the kitchen, realizing that even though I was living under their roof, I was entirely on my own. I thought, maybe foolishly, that my dad would step in for once, that he'd take some responsibility since it was his carelessness that wrecked the car in the first place. I brought it up carefully, reminding him that I was only trying to get to work, to hold on to the one thing that gave me even a sliver of independence, and that the compromise with mom wasn't unreasonable. But he barely even blinked. He just nodded in agreement with her and said something like, "She's got a point," before adding, "You've still got that bike in the garage, right? Might be good exercise." I stared at him, stunned that he could be so dismissive, as if a 45-minute highway commute could be solved with a second-hand mountain bike and a water bottle. No apology. No offer to help cover a rental. No accountability at all. Just silence and a shrug like I was making a big deal out of nothing. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just dealing with bad luck. I was living with people who saw my problems as inconveniences, not as their responsibility even when they caused them. When I finally reached the point where I couldn't keep quiet anymore, I told them it wasn't fair, that I was trying to work, trying to rebuild my life, and that the bare minimum I expected was a little support after everything that had happened, especially since my dad was the one who wrecked the car I relied on. But instead of listening or even acknowledging that I had a right to be frustrated, they turned it around on me. My mom folded her arms, and my dad sat back in his chair, and together they told me I was being ungrateful, that I had no right to complain while living under their roof rent-free. As if the roof itself erased every other failure of basic decency. As if I owed them silence just because I had nowhere else to go. That word, ungrateful, hit me like a slap in the face. I wanted to scream that gratitude isn't supposed to mean submission, that support shouldn't come with invisible chains. But I just stood there, jaw tight, feeling smaller than I had in years. I tried to keep my voice calm, not because I wasn't angry, but because I knew the second I raised it, the conversation would turn into another shouting match I couldn't win. I told them that the car wasn't a gift, it was mine, paid for entirely with the money I'd earned working double shifts and skipping meals. I reminded them that I pay for my own insurance every month, that I buy my own groceries most of the time, and that I contribute to the electric bill, the internet, and whatever else they ask me to help with. I wasn't just sitting around freeloading, and I said it all clearly, hoping they'd finally listen. But they didn't. My mom looked annoyed, like I was dragging out a conversation she considered closed, and my dad just stared at the TV like I wasn't even in the room. It didn't matter how much I had done or how respectfully I tried to say it, what they had decided about me was already set in stone. I wasn't heard. I wasn't seen. Just tolerated as long as I stayed quiet and grateful and didn't make things difficult. Eventually, maybe out of guilt or maybe just to shut me up, my parents agreed to cover the cost of the repairs. It wasn't framed as an apology, just a transactional fix to get things back to normal, as my dad put it. In the meantime, we agreed to share their car. I adjusted my schedule around theirs, making sure I left early, got home late, and didn't inconvenience them more than necessary. I genuinely believed, or maybe just hoped, that the worst of it was behind us, that the fight had burned itself out and we could coexist peacefully until I was stable enough to move out. For a brief moment, things felt civil. We weren't warm, but we were functioning. I told myself this was the closest to resolution I was going to get. But I should have known, peace in that house always came with conditions I hadn't been warned about. Exactly 1 week after the mechanic confirmed my car would be ready in a few more days, my mom cornered me in the kitchen with that expression that always meant a lecture was coming. Without any lead-in, she told me she expected a full refund for the money they had spent on the repair. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, like she had been rehearsing the moment. I reminded her gently that it wasn't her who had been driving the car when it got wrecked. I even said it without sarcasm, just trying to keep the peace. But she cut me off and said, "It doesn't matter, it's not my problem anymore. You should be responsible for your own things." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. The logic was upside down. My dad had crashed the car, they agreed to pay for the repairs, and now she was pretending it was some generous loan I owed back, even though it hadn't been framed that way at all. I stood there, stunned, as she walked away, leaving me with the bitter understanding that in this house, help always came with strings. Only they didn't tell you about the strings until they were already around your neck. A few days after that conversation about the money, when I thought maybe things had just blown over again, I came home from work late, exhausted and hungry, only to find all my belongings stacked in crooked cardboard boxes right there on the front step. My clothes were half folded, my books tossed in with bathroom supplies, and a few fragile things I cared about were already cracked from how carelessly they'd been packed. For a second I thought maybe something terrible had happened, until the front door opened and my mom stepped out, arms crossed, no hint of regret in her voice. She didn't shout, didn't cry, just looked at me and said flatly, "I'm tired of you being ungrateful." Like that was all the explanation she needed, like that single sentence justified evicting her son with no warning, no conversation, no dignity. I stood there under the porch light, surrounded by pieces of my life in taped-up boxes, realizing with hollow finality that this place had never been a home, just a holding cell with a timer that had finally run out. As I stood there trying to process what was happening, hoping that at the very least my dad would step in, say something, offer even a flicker of reason, he came to the doorway, looked at me for a moment, and then gently echoed her words like he was reading off a script they'd practiced together. "It's just not working anymore," he said quietly, as if that softened the blow, as if betrayal whispered was somehow kinder. I stared at him, stunned, because we had talked, just the week before, about me moving out in 2 months once I had saved enough. He had nodded, agreed it made sense, even asked if I needed help looking for a place. And now, here he was, standing shoulder to shoulder with the woman who had tossed my life onto the lawn like it was trash day, pretending none of that had ever happened. I felt like I was floating above the scene, disconnected, numb. It wasn't just the shock of being kicked out. It was the realization that promises in that house meant nothing, that support was conditional and fragile, and that I was never truly wanted there, just temporarily tolerated until I took up too much space. With nowhere else to go and barely enough time to think, I called Nick, one of the only people in my life who had ever shown me steady, uncomplicated kindness. I don't even remember exactly what I said. I think it came out as a mix of disbelief and desperation. But he didn't hesitate. "Come over," he said. "You can crash here until you figure things out." An hour later, I was dragging my dented boxes up the stairs to his place, heart pounding with a strange mix of shame and relief. His apartment wasn't big, just a one-bedroom with a couch that had seen better days, but it felt warmer than anything I'd known in months. I didn't know how long I would stay, how I'd get my car back, or what I was going to do next. But I did know one thing. Someone had opened a door for me, not to throw me out but to take me in. And that was enough for now. A few nights after settling into Nick's place, I got a message from my brother Ryan asking if we could talk. We hadn't been especially close in recent years. Mostly because he stayed neutral in family tensions, but something in his tone made me agree. When we met, he looked uncomfortable, like he'd been holding something heavy in for a long time. Then, slowly, he told me what he had overheard growing up, what my mother had said about me more than once when she thought I wasn't listening or wasn't around. She had called me a mistake, a punishment from above, something she never wanted but had been forced to carry through with because of family pressure. Ryan said she struggled badly during her pregnancy with me, that she resented the timing, the circumstances, and ultimately me. I just sat there, frozen, as the pieces clicked into place. Not just the recent betrayal but all the cold glances, the subtle jabs, the lack of warmth I'd spent years trying to earn without ever understanding why I had to earn it at all. It was like learning that all the rejection hadn't been about something I'd done, but simply about who I was. And for the first time in my life, I stopped wondering what I did wrong and started realizing that some wounds weren't mine to carry. The weight of Ryan's words wouldn't leave me, so against every instinct I called my dad. I didn't know what I expected, maybe denial, maybe anger, but instead, after a long pause, he quietly confirmed everything. He told me that Deborah had struggled to bond with me from the moment I was born, that something inside her just shut down when it came to me, though he never understood exactly why. He said she was overwhelmed, that the pregnancy wasn't planned, and that she carried a bitterness she never let go of. But when I asked him why he didn't say anything all these years, why he let me believe her coldness was something I deserved, he only said, "It wasn't your fault." As if that was enough. As if decades of silence could be washed away by a simple sentence that came far too late. He didn't apologize. He didn't explain. He just confirmed the reality I'd been choking on since childhood, that the distance I always felt was never imagined, never earned. It was real and it was never about me. After everything, after the years of being treated like a burden, after the silent meals and the louder betrayals, after being thrown out of my own home like I was an inconvenience, I finally made the decision that should have come long ago. I cut them all off. I blocked my mother, who never saw me as more than a mistake. I blocked my father, who had all the words I needed to hear growing up but never once used them. And I even blocked my sister, who had made it painfully clear through every judgmental comment and every moment of silence that she had chosen their side. I didn't make a dramatic announcement. I didn't scream or beg or explain. I just stopped replying, stopped waiting, stopped hoping. I chose peace over connection. And for the first time, that peace didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. I'm not angry anymore, not in the way I used to be. I'm just done. Done trying to fix something I didn't break. Done carrying a weight that was never mine. And done pretending that love should be proven through suffering. I'm building something new now. A life where I choose who gets to be in it. A life where I get to be more than a mistake. Losing my job felt like the universe testing whether I had anything left in me to break, like the final blow after a season of losses that had already hollowed me out. I stared at the email from HR for a long time, the words blurring together, and for a moment I didn't even feel panic, just a quiet, familiar numbness. I told Nick that night and he didn't flinch. He just nodded, handed me a soda, and told me I could stay as long as I needed. I know I can't stay there forever, but I've already made arrangements to move in with another friend next month, someone who offered without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. It still stings being in this place in life where everything I've tried to build feels like it's been reset to zero. But for once, I'm not doing it alone. I have people around me, not the ones who should have protected me, not the ones who gave me their last name but never gave me their support, but the ones who chose me anyway. And that means I still have something to rebuild from. I'm starting from scratch and it is terrifying. I have no job, no savings, no home of my own, and the kind of silence around me that used to feel suffocating now feels strangely holy. I am hurt, deeply, repeatedly, with wounds that still bleed if I touch them too long, but I am no longer tethered to people who saw my existence as a favor they regretted. I am desperate, yes, unsure of what tomorrow looks like, but I am also free. Free in a way I didn't know was possible. Free from the eyes that always looked at me with disappointment. Free from the kind of love that comes with conditions and unspoken expectations. free from needing to explain myself to people who never tried to understand. For the first time in my life, I'm allowed to exist without apology. I may be rebuilding with shaking hands, but they're finally my own. And this time I get to choose the foundation.